Before this story truly begins, please take 1 second to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear isn't just a love story. It's a lesson about loyalty, boundaries, and the kind of betrayal that reshapes a man forever. If you've ever loved deeply, trusted fully, and believed in forever, this story is for you. I had been planning this night for 3 months straight. Not the kind of planning where you just pick a date and show up, but the kind that lives in your head every day, even when you're working, even when you're tired, even when you're trying to sleep. Every extra shift I took, every invitation from friends that I turned down, every small comfort I denied myself was all leading to this one moment. Our second anniversary. To some people, it's just a number. To me, it was proof that what we had was real, that we had survived misunderstandings, distance, arguments, jealousy, stress, and still chose each other every day. I didn't want just a nice night. I wanted a night she would remember forever. The idea for everything started months earlier when the moment the menus were placed in front of us. I realized how uncomfortable silence could be when it was filled with too many unspoken thoughts. My eyes drifted over the page without really seeing anything. Words blurred together. I could barely focus. My attention kept sliding back to the space between them. How close they sat, how naturally their shoulders leaned toward each other, how easily they shared quiet smiles that didn't include me. Ryan was the first to speak again. "You always pick the best spots," he said to her casually, as if this were something they usually did together. "You've got taste." She smiled, almost shyly. "You know me." Those words struck harder than they should have. You know me. I had spent 2 years thinking I knew her, learning her moods, her fears, what made her laugh when she tried not to smile. And yet here was someone else speaking as if that understanding already belonged to him. Cleared my throat. "I actually chose the place," I said gently, not trying to compete, just trying to remind the moment who I was in it. "Oh," she said quickly. "Right? Yeah." He did. Ryan raised his eyebrows slightly and gave a half smile. "Nice choice, man," he said. But the words felt hollow, like a courtesy given after the first bite of food should have been a relief, a moment to savor something beautiful after hours of anticipation. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, a hollow weight pressing against my chest. Ryan had taken the lead from the start, talking to her as if our 2-year relationship meant nothing more than background noise. He laughed at her jokes before I could respond, leaned toward her when she spoke, and even lightly touched her hand as he recounted some memory I wasn't part of. The kind of small, intimate touches that felt casual between them, but in my world they were invasive, almost deliberate. I tried to focus on my plate. I chewed slowly, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But nothing about that night felt fine anymore. Every glance I gave her, every fleeting smile she directed at me, was half-hearted, distracted, shared with him more than with me. I had spent weeks imagining the night, rehearsing what I would say, how I would surprise her, how I would see the light in her eyes as I presented the necklace. And here I was, watching him step into every moment I had prepared, filling every space I had thought was ours. "Man," Ryan said loudly, cutting through the quiet jazz of the piano, "I can't believe how long it's been. You haven't changed a bit." He turned toward her, his smile wide, familiar. "Remember that time in high school when we—" And I felt it immediately. I couldn't take it anymore. Every laugh, every whisper, every touch. It was like watching someone slowly erase me from the story I thought was mine. I needed air. I needed space to think, to breathe, to remind myself I still existed outside this table that had been stolen from me. Without a word, I stood up, excusing myself quietly, murmuring something about needing a moment. I walked away from the table, the clink of cutlery and the low hum of conversation fading behind me as I moved toward the hallway. The city lights outside the glass walls blurred as I focused on each step, my mind spinning faster than my legs could carry me. My heart pounded, not just from anger, not just from humiliation, but from confusion, the kind that gnaws at the edges of your trust and leaves you questioning everything you thought was real. How could someone I loved and trusted for 2 years allow this? How could she invite him here, let him behave this way, and smile as if nothing was wrong. I reached the hallway outside the restroom, hoping for a moment of silence, a breath of air, a chance to gather myself before returning to the table. That's when I heard them. Voices. Low, urgent, almost conspiratorial. I paused, my back pressed lightly against the wall. I shouldn't eavesdrop. I knew that. I walked back to the table, but I didn't sit down. Not yet. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the heat of betrayal that still burned in my chest. The table that I had imagined for so long, the perfect place to celebrate our love, with the city lights behind her, the soft piano in the background, the velvet box waiting in my pocket, was no longer mine. It belonged to them now. She belonged to them, if that's what she wanted, and I realized with a painful clarity that nothing I had built tonight, nothing I had sacrificed, could compete with the invisible claim they had staked on this moment. The wine glasses glimmered in the dim light, the candles flickered gently, and the food sat untouched in front of me. He laughed again at something she said, leaning close, resting his hand on hers just long enough to be noticed but never too long to seem intentional. And she laughed, that same laugh that had once been mine alone. Every memory I had of us, the whispered promises, the late-night conversations, the moments of quiet comfort, was now overshadowed by their presence. I reached slowly into my pocket and felt the small velvet box. I had carried it for months, imagining the moment I would finally see her face light up. And now I realized that whatever joy that necklace was meant to bring could never belong to her again. She had already chosen. The choice had been made in whispers I had overheard, in subtle touches, in shared laughter. The necklace would no longer represent love. It would only mark the moment I finally let go. I stood up fully, reaching for my wallet. The waiter approached, confused by my hesitation, but I simply nodded. I wanted to pay all of it, the food, the wine, the dessert they had shared in a mock celebration. It was only after the night ended, after I walked away with my head held high and the cool air of the city brushing against my face, that the full picture of what had happened began to settle in my mind. I replayed everything in vivid detail. Her laugh, his smile, the way they leaned toward each other, the subtle touches, the whispered words I had overheard. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a betrayal born of opportunity. This was calculated. Every moment had been orchestrated, every action deliberate. And Ryan was never in love with her. He was never in love with anyone. Ryan had wanted power, recognition, the thrill of winning. And in him I saw the type of person who doesn't build anything. They destroy and claim, leaving a trail of broken hearts as trophies. I thought about the way he had watched us over the past 2 years, the subtle ways he had inserted himself into her life, the way he knew her fears, her insecurities, the things she loved, the things she hated. He had observed, waited patiently, and when the moment was perfect, he stepped in and claimed what he wanted. Not because of love, but because he could. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Ryan had studied our relationship like a chessboard. Every step, every move calculated. He didn't need her heart. He only needed her compliance long enough to prove that he could disrupt something real. And she had allowed it, not out of malice but out of weakness, confusion, or perhaps a need to be swept. Months had passed since that night. The night that had changed everything. The memory of the restaurant, the stolen laughter, the whispered words I had overheard, and the velvet box left untouched in front of her plate had never truly left me. I carried it with me, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what I had endured, what I had survived, and what I would never allow again. Life had moved on around me, but inside, there was a quiet tension, a readiness for the moment when clarity would finally meet consequence. I didn't expect to see her. I hadn't planned for it. But life has a way of bringing ghosts back to the places you least expect. It was a quiet afternoon, the city streets humming softly with the rhythm of ordinary lives. I was walking briskly, my mind focused on work and daily tasks, when I saw her, across the street, framed by the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. She froze when she saw me, not with surprise exactly, but with recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when someone realizes that the person standing in front of them has moved on, has changed, and is no longer accessible in the ways they once were. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but words failed her. And in that brief moment, I felt something shift. Not for her, but inside me. I was no longer the man who would silently endure. I was no longer the one whose night, whose love, whose life could be manipulated and claimed by someone else. She crossed the street slowly, as though approaching cautiously, afraid of the reaction she would receive. I stayed still, watching, feeling a mixture of curiosity and calm that I hadn't expected. This was the moment I had imagined countless times. Not as revenge, not as triumph, but as clarity. The truth, finally confronted. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I studied her face. There was no arrogance, no charm, just raw, unpolished regret. Her eyes held something I hadn't seen in months. Awareness. The days after our final encounter passed differently than I had imagined. There were no dramatic confrontations, no tears exchanged in public, no lingering arguments. Just the quiet, heavy weight of reflection that settled into my life like an uninvited guest. At first, I tried to distract myself. Work, friends, routines, but every quiet moment, every pause in the noise of the city, brought her and that night back into focus. I realized then that healing wasn't about erasing the memory. It was about understanding it, owning it, and using it as a foundation to rebuild myself stronger than before. I began to reflect on the 2 years we had shared. The good moments weren't gone. They still existed, preserved in memory, in photographs, in the little habits we had built together. But I saw them differently now. I could separate love from attachment, understanding from dependency. I realized that love isn't just about passion, excitement, or the spark that draws two people together. True love, self-respecting, enduring love, is about respect, trust, and alignment. And that night had shown me exactly where those things were missing, and where they were never going to exist again with her. I started to focus on myself in ways I hadn't before. I took long walks in the city, not to escape, but to think. I read books I had left unfinished. I pursued hobbies I had neglected. I allowed myself to feel the hurt, fully, but I refused to let it define me. Each memory of betrayal became a lesson in awareness, in resilience, in boundaries. Each moment I remembered the laughter that had been stolen became fuel for growth rather than resentment. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to smile again. Not the forced, polite smile I had worn at the restaurant that night, but the real one that came from a place of self-assuredness. I learned to trust myself again, to honor my instincts, to recognize when someone's charm masks intent. I learned that walking away doesn't always feel victorious at first. It often feels lonely, but that loneliness is temporary, while dignity is permanent. I reflected on Ryan, too. Not with anger anymore, not with jealousy, not with the desire to confront or punish. I understood him as someone who thrives on control and validation, someone who takes without investing. And I realized that people like him, people who manipulate, who insert themselves into lives that aren't theirs, are ultimately hollow. They create temporary thrills for themselves, but they leave destruction in their wake, while the people they affect are left to rebuild. I had survived, and in surviving I had grown stronger. I also thought about her regret, about the fleeting moment she had reached out, about the realization she had faced too late. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. I simply acknowledged the truth. She had made her choices and I had made mine. The power of closure wasn't in revenge or resentment. It was in accepting reality, taking control of my own narrative, and refusing to let someone else's actions dictate my worth or my future. Months turned into seasons, and with each passing day, I felt lighter. The city lights, once a backdrop to heartbreak, now felt like a canvas for new beginnings. I walked past restaurants and rooftops where memories had been stolen, and I didn't feel bitterness. I felt readiness. Readiness to love again. Readiness to trust again. Readiness to build something real with someone who respects boundaries, values loyalty, and honors